The air inside the brass lantern was heavy with the kind of wealth that seeps into polished wood and velvet drapes. It carried the tang of seared scallops, the musk of aged leather, and the faint sparkle of vintage champagne. To the patrons, it was the fragrance of exclusivity. To Ava Thompson, 22 and bone-deep, exhausted from her second double shift this week, it was simply the smell of survival. Each clink of silver against porcelain counted down the minutes until she could drag her aching body home, collapse on her thrift store couch, and pray that her mother's labored breathing had not worsened. Then he walked in. Grant Whitaker. His face graced the covers of every financial magazine. The poster child for American ingenuity. He wasn't just rich. He was mythologized. A man who had supposedly cracked the impossible, creating the Whitaker core that revolutionized energy. A single stroke of his pen could rattle global markets. And tonight, he sat down in Ava's section, a king claiming his throne in the middle of her battleground. Ava smoothed her apron, every nerve sharpened with professional discipline. She was trained to be invisible, a phantom in black uniform who anticipated without intruding. Yet she could not stop the flicker of bitterness that always rose when serving men like him. 2 years ago, she had been a physics prodigy at Caltech, a full scholarship student whose future blazed like a comet. Then the phone call had come. Her mother collapsed, Helen Thompson, diagnosed with a rare degenerative neurological disorder. Tuition was covered, but the avalanche of hospital bills was not. Ava had dropped everything, abandoned lectures on plasma containment fields for tray carrying, rent checks, and Medicaid appeals. The girl who once solved quantum puzzles for fun now calculated bus schedules and overtime hours. And through it all, the absence of her father, Dr. Elias Thompson, pressed like a bruise that never healed. 10 years earlier, he had vanished. The police called it suicide, his car found near a lighthouse, a vague note about failure. His body was never recovered, but Ava had refused to believe it. Elias Thompson was a fighter, a man who used to sketch fusion chambers on napkins while explaining the stars as bedtime stories. A man who whispered to her about a project, Chimera, that would change the world. He wouldn't simply walk into the sea. He wouldn't abandon them. Water, Grant Whitaker said sharply, dragging her from the spiral of memory. His tone wasn't addressed to her so much as hurled in her direction, as if she were a voice-activated appliance. "Yes, sir," Ava replied, her face smooth as marble. He did not look at her when he ordered. "We'll start with the Oysters Rockefeller, and bring the 2005 Montrachet, not the cellar backup, the real one." His investors chuckled, dutiful sycophants clinking glasses. Ava poured, nodded, turned, all while fury curled hot in her chest. She should have been at a research lab, not measuring the temperature of wine bottles. Then Whitaker reached for the leather-bound portfolio beside him. He slid it onto the table with the reverence of a priest laying down scripture. His voice rose, commanding attention. "Gentlemen, before we talk about the future, allow me to show you the past, the very genesis of Whitaker Industries." He opened the portfolio and drew out a laminated sheet of drafting paper, yellowed with age. Lines, equations, and a schematic bloomed across its surface. Elegant, intricate, revolutionary. A fusion energy device. A chamber woven with magnetic fields, injectors poised like the strings of a cosmic harp. The restaurant faded. Ava's breath caught, her pulse hammering in her ears. Because at the bottom right corner, dated 20 years ago, was a signature. A signature she had traced with her finger on report cards, on birthday cards, on the inside covers of second-hand textbooks. A looping, confident E, a precise, strong T. Elias Thompson, her father's name. The world tilted. Dishes clattered somewhere far away, muffled as though underwater. The pitcher of water in her hand turned to stone. 10 years of doubt, suspicion, grief, all collided into a single piercing point of certainty. Her father hadn't been delusional. He hadn't been a ghost story whispered by neighbors with pitying eyes. He had been erased. And this man had his work. Waitress, Whitaker barked again, annoyed that his glass remained empty. Ava stepped forward, mechanical, as if in a dream. She poured, her hand steady, despite the storm roaring inside. Whitaker tapped the page proudly. 20 years ago, he announced, a flash of inspiration that became a $1 trillion reality. The original design for the Whitaker Corps. The investors leaned in, nodding in awe. But Ava was no longer the silent waitress. Her eyes locked on the page, then on the titan who had stolen it. Her voice, when it came, was clear, quiet, and sharper than broken glass. "Sir," she said, "that's my dad's signature." The words sliced the air. Whitaker froze. For a heartbeat, his face was unmasked, stripped of arrogance. It wasn't annoyance or dismissal that flashed across him. It was fear. The raw, primal fear of a ghost walking out of a grave. The water glass slipped from his hand. Time stretched as it spun, glinting under the chandeliers, before smashing against the mahogany table. The explosion of crystal shards rang out, shocking the dining room into silence. Water spread across the white tablecloth, soaking into the precious schematic. "What did you just say?" Whitaker rasped, voice suddenly hoarse. His eyes darted from the page to Ava, panic widening them. Around them, forks hovered mid-air, conversation stuttered to a halt. The brass lantern had become a stage, and every patron was now a witness. "That signature," Ava said, her finger trembling but resolute as she pointed at the page. "Thompson. Elias Thompson. He was my father." Whitaker's mask cracked into fury. He snatched the schematic, blotting at it with a napkin, his voice booming, brittle. "Preposterous. Security." Two guards loomed closer. The restaurant manager, Mr. Langley, appeared, his smile tight, his eyes pleading with Ava to back down. "I'm not delusional," Ava shot back, louder now, her voice cutting through the whispers. "I know his work. I know his equations." He called it Project Chimera. The name detonated in the room. Grant Whitaker went pale, his expensive tan bleaching into ash. For a second, he swayed, as if the word itself were a physical blow. He lunged to reclaim control, towering over her. "She's unstable. Fire her immediately." Mr. Langley turned, his verdict final. "Miss Thompson, collect your things. You're finished here." The guards moved in, a wall of muscle. But Ava stood taller, though her apron felt like a shroud. 10 years of silence had ended with a single declaration, and the man who pretended to own the world had flinched. As she was escorted toward the kitchen doors, she glanced back one last time. Whitaker's fear had hardened into something colder, a promise of destruction. Her job was gone, her mother's medication unpaid, her future shattered. Yet beneath the humiliation, a new fire burned. His reaction had not been innocence, it had been guilt. For the first time in a decade, Ava Thompson had a target, and she would not let him bury the truth again. The public library smelled of dust and disinfectant. Its computers were old, their fans wheezing with every search. But for Ava Thompson, they were the closest thing she had to a command center. Her apron was still crumpled at the bottom of her tote bag, a relic of a life already gone. She had nothing left but stubbornness, a trembling stack of her father's notebooks hidden in her closet, and a name, Grant Whitaker, burning like acid in her mind. She typed furiously, scouring news archives. At first, all she found was a carefully manicured garden of success stories. Visionary, innovator, the man who lit the world. His record was spotless, suspiciously spotless. Every lawsuit settled, every controversy buried. Then she found it. A name tucked in a forgotten corner of an online forum, Noah Reed. A decade ago, Reed had been a rising investigative star at the New York Chronicle, notorious for his unflinching exposés. 6 years back, he had aimed his spotlight at Whitaker. The articles had suggested irregularities in the founding of Whitaker Industries, whispers of a vanished partner, questions about the origins of the Whitaker Corps. But the articles were gone now, replaced by retractions and editorials branding Reed reckless. Whitaker had sued, the Chronicle had caved, and Noah Reed had been fired, disgraced, discarded. Ava leaned back in her chair, heart thudding. Disgraced or not, Reed had sniffed around the truth. He had been punished for it, which meant he was dangerous to Whitaker, which meant he was valuable to her. 2 days later, she stood in front of a decaying walk-up on the industrial side of the city. The stairwell reeked of mildew and fried oil. Apartment 4B's door bore the scars of old eviction notices. Ava knocked, her knuckles trembling. The door creaked open. The man in the frame was younger than the photographs she'd seen, maybe late 30s. His hair was messy, his jaw rough with stubble. A stained T-shirt clung to his shoulders. His eyes were wary, shadowed, yet still sharp. "Yeah?" he muttered. "Are you Noah Reed?" Ava asked, clutching her tote tighter. "Depends who's asking. If you're selling something, I'm broke. If you're serving papers, leave them on the mat." "My name is Ava Thompson," she said. "I read your articles about Grant Whitaker." The boredom drained from his face. Something pained flickered in his eyes, like a scar pressed too hard. He started to close the door. Ancient history. I was wrong. The paper said so. The whole world said so. Ava pressed her palm against the door. "You weren't wrong. You just didn't have the proof." He hesitated, studying her. She wasn't a crank or a conspiracy nut. He saw the raw desperation etched into her face. He sighed, a sound of surrender. 5 minutes, he said, swinging the door wider. "Then you're gone." Inside, the apartment was chaos. Stacks of newspapers toppled like leaning towers. Books littered the floor. Whiteboards lined the walls, scrawled with diagrams, names, and arrows, connected by red string. At the center of it all was a sprawling board dedicated to Whitaker Industries, a madman's tapestry of obsession. "You're still investigating him," Ava said softly. "Let's call it a hobby," Noah muttered, clearing a chair. "Like building ships in a bottle. Pointless, but it passes the time. So, what's your angle? Did Whitaker's factory poison your water? Did one of his cars run over your cat?" Ava ignored the sarcasm. She set her tote on the table, unzipped it, and began pulling out evidence. First, the faded photograph. Elias Thompson and a young Grant Whitaker, arms slung around each other, standing in front of a shabby building labeled Northbridge Applied Sciences. Then, the legal document, the Helios Innovations Dissolution Agreement, dated 3 weeks before her father's disappearance. And finally, a notebook filled with her father's neat handwriting. Early drafts of the same fusion schematic Whitaker now paraded as his own. Noah's cynicism faltered. He picked up the contract, squinting at the signature. His journalist's eye caught the inconsistencies immediately. The hesitation of the pen, the uneven pressure. A forgery. "Last night," Ava said, voice steady, "Whitaker was at the restaurant where I worked. He showed off the original schematic. It had my father's real signature on it. I called him out. He had me fired." Silence. Noah walked across the room, rubbing the back of his neck, the photograph of the 2 young men trembling in his hand. For years, he had chased shadows. Now, standing in his living room, was the missing piece, the daughter of the ghost partner, with proof. "Project Chimera," he whispered, glancing at his own whiteboard where the word sat, scrawled with a question mark. Ava nodded. "That was my father's name for it." Noah looked at her, and for the first time in years, the weary cynicism cracked. The fire of the reporter he once was sparked back to life. "Kid," he said, voice low, Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? This isn't just stolen credit. A man like Whitaker doesn't build $1 trillion empire and leave loose ends. If your father didn't sign this, and then he vanishes, I don't think he's dead, Ava whispered. I think Whitaker hid him. Their next lead came from the photograph itself. Northbridge Applied Sciences. Most records had been lost when the company went bankrupt 15 years ago. But Noah's persistence unearthed an old staff directory. One name stood out: Harold Price, senior lab technician. Finding him wasn't easy. No social media, no address. Finally, Noah discovered his name on the roster of a vintage radio enthusiasts club. A retired man, living quietly 3 hours away. When they arrived at his tidy bungalow, Harold was a bird-like man in his late 70s, eyes watery, hands trembling. At first, he refused to let them in, but when Ava introduced herself as Elias Thompson's daughter, his composure crumbled. I knew this day would come, he whispered, wringing his hands. I always knew it. Inside, surrounded by ham radios and carefully polished trophies, Harold unburdened himself of a 20-year secret. Your father was brilliant, Harold said, his voice breaking. The rest of us were just engineers. He was a poet of physics. Whitaker was the salesman, charming, ambitious, ruthless. He saw Elias's genius, but he saw it as a resource to be mined, not a gift to be honored. He described the slow shift. As Elias got closer to a working prototype of Project Chimera, Whitaker grew possessive. He began locking Elias out of meetings, telling investors that Elias was unstable, merely a researcher who needed management. He was building the lie brick by brick. Then came the day Harold could never forget, an emergency staff meeting. Whitaker holding up a signed document, the dissolution agreement. He declared Elias was leaving due to a breakdown. Later that day, Harold saw two men who didn't look like scientists, escort Elias out of the lab, protesting. He's being taken to get help, Whitaker claimed. Elias was never seen again. We were terrified, Harold admitted, eyes wet. Whitaker had just secured funding. He said if word got out about Elias's instability, the money would vanish, and we'd all be ruined. Then he paid us severance, hush money. And a month later, Whitaker Industries was born. Ava's lungs felt crushed. You saw them take him? Harold nodded, shame etched deep. Do you know where? Noah pressed. A hospital? A clinic? Harold hesitated. That day, I overheard Whitaker on the phone. He mentioned a place, a long-term care facility, private, discreet, a place where difficult cases could be managed. He called it Cedar Ridge. The name hung heavy in the air. Noah typed furiously into his laptop. Minutes later, he looked up, grim. It's still around, rebranded as Cedar Ridge Wellness Retreat. High-end, high security. A fortress for the rich and inconvenient. Ava's pulse pounded. For 10 years, she had mourned a death. Now, a fragile flicker of hope ignited. Her father wasn't gone. He was imprisoned. But hope brought danger. The retaliation began almost immediately. Ava's unemployment claim was inexplicably denied. Noah's blog suffered relentless cyber attacks. One night, Ava returned home to find her apartment door splintered, her father's notebooks scattered across the floor. Nothing stolen, just a message. We know. Helen begged her daughter to stop. Please, Ava, she whispered, frail hands clutching Ava's. Whitaker is too powerful. I can't lose you too. Guilt pierced Ava, but rage hardened over it. That's exactly why I can't stop, Mom. If he could erase Dad, he can erase anyone. He won't erase me. Desperation forced their hand. Harold, shaken by the intimidation, offered more. There might be a way in, he said over a secure call Noah had rigged. Years ago, Helios bid to upgrade the old Cedar Ridge HVAC system. I saw the plans. There might still be an unguarded service duct. Noah dug through county archives, posing as a preservation researcher. After hours of dusty schematics, He found it. A massive ventilation outflow duct, hidden by overgrown woods on the west side. According to the old blueprints, it was big enough for a person to crawl through. It was their sliver of hope, their path into the fortress. The night was moonless, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. A logging road, little more than 2 ruts cut into dirt, stretched into the woods. There, under the skeletal arms of bare trees, a rented sedan idled with its lights off. Inside, Noah Reed adjusted the dials of his laptop, the glow casting deep shadows across his tired features. A signal booster hummed quietly, paired to a police scanner and Ava's tiny earpiece. "Comms check," he said. His voice carried the clipped tone of someone forcing calm over nerves. "I hear you," Ava Thompson whispered. Her collar mic trembled with each word. She was dressed in dark clothing, her hair pulled back tight, her face pale but resolute. "You'll have a 30-minute window," Noah reminded her. "That's the patrol sweep cycle. Get in, get the picture, and get out. Do not engage. Do not get caught. Your safety comes first." Ava's hands tightened on the straps of her backpack, which contained a flashlight, a multi-tool, and a burner phone. She gave a tight nod, though he couldn't see it. "Every day we wait is another day he loses," she murmured, eyes fixed on the dark tree line. "I'm going in." Noah opened his mouth to protest again, then closed it. "Good luck, Ava," he said softly. She managed a thin smile. "See you in 30. Then she slipped into the woods, vanishing into the dark. The forest was alive with small, betraying sounds. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, the far-off call of a night bird. To Ava, every noise was a gunshot. Her pulse thundered so loudly she feared it would give her away. The silhouette of Cedar Ridge Wellness Retreat loomed above the trees, a sleek facade of stone and glass, rising like a modern fortress. She crouched by a thicket of overgrown brush and found it, the outflow vent, rust-streaked and forgotten, half swallowed by ivy. The bolts on the grate were corroded. With shaking hands, Ava unscrewed them one by one, the metal groaning softly. She pulled the grate free and slid into the duct, the stale air closing around her like a tomb. The shaft was claustrophobic, barely wide enough to crawl. Her elbows scraped against cold metal, her knees ached, cobwebs clung to her hair. The smell was a mix of rust and disinfectant, sharp and nauseating. Her flashlight beam flickered across the narrow tunnel, revealing rust flakes like dried blood. "Noah," she whispered, her voice tight. "I'm in." "Copy," his voice crackled back. "Keep moving. Follow the duct until you reach the main junction, then drop down. You'll hit the service tunnels." Every foot forward felt like an eternity. She counted bolts along the seams to keep panic from overwhelming her. When the duct finally opened to a grate, she unscrewed it with the multi-tool and lowered herself carefully into a cavernous basement. The service tunnels were dimly lit with caged bulbs. Pipes lined the ceiling like veins. A low hum reverberated through the concrete, the pulse of the building itself. "Maintenance stair C should be ahead," Noah guided. "That'll take you up to the west wing." Ava's sneakers made almost no sound on the concrete, yet she flinched at every echo. She found the staircase, its faded stenciled letters nearly erased by time. The iron handrail was cold as she ascended, her breath shallow. At the top, she pushed open the door and entered another world. The hallway of the West Wing was immaculate. Polished marble floors, cream-colored walls, soft recessed lighting. It looked more like a luxury hotel than a prison. Yet the silence was suffocating, the kind that hummed louder than noise. The doors were heavy oak, each one numbered, each with a narrow, reinforced glass window and a tray slot. "I'm in the West Wing," Ava whispered. "Stay sharp," Noah replied. "This is the high-security ward. Patients here are kept isolated, heavily sedated. Start checking the rooms. 20 minutes left." Ava moved door to door. Through one window, she saw an elderly woman, eyes vacant, staring at a television playing static. Another room held a man muttering in his sleep, body twitching with restless dreams. Each room was sterile, suffused with despair. These were not patients. They were secrets, paid for and forgotten. Then Ava reached room 113. She peered through the glass. The room was spare, a bed, a small table, a chair. Sitting on the edge of the bed, hunched, was a man. His hair was thin, gray. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He was sketching slowly in a small notebook, his pencil scratching faintly. Ava's breath stopped. He turned slightly, and she saw his profile in the dim light. The high forehead, the curve of his brow, the nose she had inherited. Dr. Elias Thompson, her father. A sob clawed up her throat. She clapped her hand over her mouth, tears streaming. For 10 years she had mourned him, believed him gone. And here he was, alive, diminished, but alive. "Noah," she whispered, voice breaking. "I've found him. It's him." Okay, Ava." Noah's voice steadied her. "Get the picture. You need proof." Hands trembling, she lifted the burner phone, framed his face through the glass. She tapped lightly against it. "Dad?" she whispered. So soft, she wasn't sure the sound carried. Elias froze. His head turned, movements sluggish from years of medication. His eyes clouded, searched the darkness. Confusion flickered, then a spark of recognition. "It's me," Ava whispered, pressing her palm to the glass. "It's Ava." His brow furrowed, lips parting as though testing the name. He rose unsteadily, shuffling closer, eyes straining to pierce the fog of his mind. And then, almost imperceptibly, he raised his hand and pressed it to the glass, mirroring hers. The moment shattered Ava's heart. She snapped the photo, his face, his hand against hers, undeniable proof. Then came the sound, a heavy metal door slamming at the end of the hall. Footsteps. "Noah, someone's coming," she hissed. "You have to leave now," he said sharply. "If they catch you, the photo's gone. You're gone. Get out." "I can't leave him," Ava choked. "If you stay, you'll lose everything," Noah urged. "The proof gets him out, not you in chains." Ava's body trembled with the weight of the choice. 10 years of grief screamed at her to stay, to break down the door. But logic, merciless cold, won. She pressed her forehead to the glass. "I love you, Dad. I'm coming back. I promise." For a heartbeat, she thought he didn't understand. But then, through the haze, Elias's eyes softened, and his hand pressed harder against the glass. Ava tore herself away. She sprinted back down the corridor, every step echoing too loud. She flew down the maintenance stairs, lungs burning, heart pounding. The basement swallowed her, the tunnels twisting back toward the duct. She scrambled inside, the metal tearing her sleeve, scraping her arm raw. She crawled frantically, the flashlight beam jolting with her movements. At last, the grate came into view. She shoved herself out into the wet night, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping for air. Branches whipped her as she stumbled through the undergrowth. And then, at last, the dark silhouette of the car appeared. She yanked the door open and collapsed into the passenger seat, shaking, her face streaked with tears and grime. "I have it," she gasped, holding up the phone like a relic. "I have the proof." Noah looked at her, then at the photo on the screen. Elias Thompson's face, his hand against the glass. A man long declared dead, alive. He reached out, steadying her shoulder as she sobbed. Not just for the father she had found, but for the years stolen, for the battle still ahead. They had entered the dragon's lair. Now, they had to figure out how to slay it. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. A simple headline flashed across phones, tablets, and computer screens. "Where is Dr. Elias Thompson?" Subheading, "From Lab to Lockdown. The Vanished Partner of Grant Whitaker." It wasn't just a story, it was a bomb. Within an hour, the phrase was trending worldwide. Stock tickers blared red as Whitaker Industries plummeted in pre-market trading, billions of dollars evaporating before Wall Street's opening bell. Satellite vans swarmed outside the company's gleaming headquarters. Reporters crowded the gates of Cedar Ridge Wellness Retreat, cameras jostling for a glimpse of the fortress that suddenly looked less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. The article was meticulous. Noah Reid had written it with surgical precision, weaving together the photograph of Elias in room 113, Harold Price's sworn affidavit, and the forged dissolution agreement. It charted the history of Helios Innovations, the betrayal, the disappearance. It laid bare the shell companies funneling money into Cedar Ridge, and it named Grant Whitaker not as a visionary, but as a thief, a liar, and a kidnapper. Whitaker's counterattack was immediate. He strode onto national television, jaw tight, eyes blazing. "These are vicious lies," he thundered, voice booming with rehearsed outrage. "The work is mine. That woman is delusional. That journalist is disgraced. I will fight this with every resource at my disposal." But the mask was slipping. The world had seen the photograph. Grainy, but undeniable. They had read Harold Price's testimony, felt the weight of his guilt. They had studied the side-by-side analysis of Elias's true signature against the forgery. Whitaker's fury didn't exonerate him. It condemned him. It was the reaction of a man cornered. The storm only swelled. By afternoon, federal agents arrived at Cedar Ridge with a warrant. Black SUVs lined the secluded road. Agents in windbreakers marked FBI pouring through the gates. The retreat staff scrambled, caught between loyalty and fear. And in room 113, Dr. Elias Thompson looked up from his notebook as the door burst open. For a moment he flinched, bracing for more orderlies, more needles. But instead, a woman in a dark jacket knelt before him, her voice gentle. "Sir, what's your name?" His eyes, long clouded by sedatives, sharpened with sudden clarity. "My name is Dr. Elias Thompson," he said, his voice rough but firm, "and I want to see my daughter." The reunion didn't happen in a prison, but in the sterile safety of a private hospital ward, far from Whitaker's reach. When Ava walked in, her breath caught. Her father sat upright in bed, IV lines in his arm, his skin pale but his gaze sharp. For the first time in 10 years, there was no fog, no distance, only recognition. "Ava," he whispered. His voice cracked, but it was his. "You found me." She rushed forward, tears breaking free as she wrapped her arms around him. The embrace erased a decade of grief, of empty birthdays, of nights spent tracing his signature like a prayer. For the first time in 10 years, she felt whole. Helen was there too, her frail hands trembling as she touched her husband's face. For a moment, illness seemed to loosen its grip, replaced by the radiance of joy. The Thompson family, broken and scattered for so long, was together again. Grant Whitaker's empire collapsed as swiftly as it had risen. That very evening, he was arrested on a private runway, attempting to flee the country aboard his jet. Cameras caught the image of the once untouchable Titan in handcuffs, his face twisted with impotent rage. The charges stacked like bricks: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, conspiracy. The forged contract, the financial trail, the falsified medical records from Cedar Ridge. They formed an airtight case. Whitaker Industries imploded. Stocks tanked beyond recovery. Board members fled. Creditors circled like vultures. For years, Whitaker had cultivated the image of a savior. Now he was revealed as a predator, and the world recoiled. But from the wreckage, something new emerged. The patents for Project Chimera, restored to their rightful owner, became the cornerstone of a rebirth. With Elias too frail to lead day-to-day operations, Ava and Noah stepped forward. Together, they founded Thomson Reed Energy, a company built not on deception, but on transparency and truth. Noah's reputation, once obliterated, was reborn. He sat on the board, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never repeat. The headline that once branded him a liar was now replaced with another: Journalist Redeemed. Exposé sparks corporate reckoning. And Ava, once the invisible waitress, the girl branded delusional in a crowded restaurant, now wore the mantle of CEO. She traded her apron for a tailored suit, but the fire in her eyes was the same. She wasn't just Elias Thompson's daughter anymore. She was a leader in her own right, carrying forward her father's vision. Months later, Ava stood in a bright laboratory, the hum of machinery filling the air. Beside her, her father, thinner but healing, traced equations on a digital screen. His hand, though frail, still moved with precision. "The containment field," Elias said, eyes alight with the old spark. "I finally solved the stabilization equation. 10 years of thinking in that room. It gave me the answer." Ava smiled, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "I know, Dad. And this time, we'll change the world, for real." He looked at her, pride shining through exhaustion. The fire that Whitaker had tried to steal was burning brighter than ever, passed from father to daughter. The story of Ava Thompson was no longer one of loss. It was one of reclamation. She had been dismissed as invisible, fired as delusional, cast out by a world eager to protect its powerful. Yet she chose to fight. She chose to believe. And in doing so, she dragged the truth into the light. The waitress no one noticed became the woman who toppled a titan. The girl who once whispered to her father's ghost now stood beside him, ready to fulfill the promise of Project Chimera. And the world, watching, learned this: no lie, however gilded, can stand forever. No empire, however vast, can bury the truth. Because truth has a memory, and family has a voice that cannot be silenced.